The wind covered a German Shepherd puppy with snow until a U.S. Marine saw a flicker of breath. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. The wind moves differently in the high country, almost like a living thing. It doesn't just pass over the world, it shapes it, sculpts it, hides what cannot cry for help. On that night, it swept across the Montana ridge with a cold so sharp it felt carved from glass. Snow drifted in slow, hypnotic spirals, gathering in the hollows and swallowing every sound until the whole world seemed to breathe in one long, frozen hush. Under that white silence lay something small. Something still. A German Shepherd puppy, no bigger than a man's forearm, half buried beneath a fresh fall of powder. His fur, once soft and warm, had stiffened with frost, and the gentle rise and fall of life had nearly stopped. Almost. The storm didn't care. The wind pressed on, piling more snow over the little body as if tucking it away from the world. No footprints surrounded him. No voice had shouted his name. He had simply been left to the mercy of the cold, and the cold rarely gave anything back. Farther down the ridge, Staff Sergeant Noah Whitaker guided his truck through the drifts, the headlights carving thin corridors of light through the white darkness. He was heading back from a supply run, tired, quiet, the kind of quiet that settles on a man who's seen too many winters, on battlefields, on roadsides, in memories that return uninvited. Snow rattled against the windshield. The wipers struggled. The world outside blurred into a single sheet of white. Then Noah saw it. Not a shape. Not a movement. Just a disturbance in the snow, a small uneven rise, as if something beneath had tried, at least once, to breathe. He slowed. Something pulled at him, the way instinct sometimes does when reason hasn't caught up yet. He stepped out into the cold, boots crunching. Breath drifting in pale clouds. The wind pressed hard against him, urging him back into the warmth, but he pushed forward, drawn to that small mound of snow. He knelt. Brushed his glove gently across the surface. What he uncovered didn't move. Not at first. But as Noah leaned closer, snow melting against the warmth of his palm, he caught it, a faint stir in the puppy's chest, a tremor so slight it could have been imagination. A flicker of breath. Enough to stop Noah's own breathing for a moment. Enough to make the frozen world feel suddenly, impossibly alive again. Noah did not move at first. He just stayed there in the stinging cold, bent over the tiny body as the wind swept around him, pulling at his jacket like a hand urging him to hurry. The faint breath he had felt could have been a trick of the storm, a pulse of wind, anything. But something inside him, the same instinct that had once saved men on ridge lines half a world away, whispered that this little life was still trying. He brushed more snow away, careful, slow, as if the smallest pressure could break something fragile. The puppy's fur was stiff with frost, tiny ears folded against the cold, and the snow had formed a thin crust along his back. Noah leaned closer, lowering his cheek near the small muzzle. There it was again. A soft exhale, barely warm, but real. The kind of breath that fights for just one more moment in a world too cold to hold on to. The wind howled across the ridge, sending a wave of powder over Noah's boots. He pulled the pup gently into his hands. The body was light, far too light, and cold enough that he felt it even through his gloves. He pressed the puppy against his chest, tucking him beneath the layers of his coat, letting his own warmth form a small shelter against the storm. The puppy did not react, but Noah felt the slightest tremor, like a question being asked in the dark. His truck was only a few steps away, yet the walk felt longer, as though the ridge itself tried to hold him in its frozen grip. Each gust pressed against his back, each step sank inches into the powder. Inside the cab, the heater fought to come alive, sputtering before sending out a breath of warm air. Noah cupped his hands around the small bundle under his coat. He did not speak loudly. Only a whisper meant for the tiny life he held. "I have got you," he murmured. "Stay with me." The puppy's chest fluttered, a faint vibration against Noah's palm. Not strong, not steady, but present. The kind of sign that made a man believe in things he had forgotten to pray for. As the windows defrosted, the mountains outside softened into pale shapes, the storm muffling every sound except the gentle hum of the heater. Noah watched the little muzzle rise and fall in uneven rhythm. He could not explain why this mattered so much. Only that in the middle of the cold, in the silence carved by wind and snow, this tiny breath felt like a promise waiting to be kept. And Noah Whitaker had never walked away from a promise. The heater continued to push warm air into the cab, filling the small space with a soft hum that steadied Noah's breathing. Snowflakes tapped against the windshield, melting into thin trails of water that slid downward like quiet reminders of how close the ridge had come to stealing this tiny life. The puppy rested beneath Noah's coat, a small weight against his chest, fragile but undeniably present. Noah kept one hand over him, feeling for every faint rise and fall, each uneven breath a reassurance that the world had not let go yet. Outside, the storm shifted, its roar fading into a steady whisper as if the mountains themselves were catching their breath. Noah eased the truck back onto the narrow road. The tires crunched through the drifts, and the headlights carved through the white darkness ahead. He drove slowly, not wanting to jostle the little body he kept pressed close. The puppy stirred once, a tiny movement, barely more than a tremble. Noah felt it through the layers of fabric and paused, letting the truck idle. "Easy," he whispered, not expecting a response. The puppy's breathing fluttered, then steadied, each inhale fragile but real. Noah exhaled, the kind of breath that comes when a man allows hope to take one small step forward. He continued down the ridge toward an old ranger outpost he had used before during training runs. It was not much, just a small wooden shelter tucked against a stand of pines, but it had heat, blankets, and a chance. When the outpost finally appeared through the storm haze, its outline ghostly against the snow, Noah felt something loosen inside his chest. He parked near the door and carefully lifted the puppy from his coat. The little body was still cold, but the frost had begun to soften along the fur, replaced by faint warmth from being held close. Noah shielded him from the wind with his arms, crossing the short distance to the shelter. As he stepped inside, the air changed. It was colder than he remembered, but still sheltered, still safe. He knelt by the small wood stove, setting the puppy on his lap while he worked to light the fire. The first spark snapped, then caught on the dry kindling. Flames rose gently, their glow spreading across the room in soft amber waves. Noah held the puppy nearer to the warmth, careful not to overwhelm him. The light revealed more details now, the faint speckling on the pup's paws, the tiny flicker of his whiskers as the air grew warmer, the way his small body curled instinctively into Noah's palm. "You are tougher than you look," Noah murmured. The puppy did not open his eyes, but his chest lifted again, a breath a little stronger than before. Outside, the storm moved across the ridge, its voice fading into the distance. Inside, in the quiet shelter lit by rising fire, a tiny heartbeat pressed against Noah's hand, steadying itself one fragile moment at a time. The fire grew steadier as minutes passed, spreading a gentle glow that softened the rough edges of the wooden walls. Noah held the puppy close, shifting him slightly so the warmth could reach his small paws. The tiny body was still cold, but no longer the kind of cold that frightened him. It was the slow thaw of something returning from the edge. Outside the shelter, the storm moved on, leaving only a faint whistle along the eaves. Inside, time felt suspended, held in place by the rhythm of the flames and the fragile breaths of the little creature fighting to stay. Noah reached for a folded wool blanket from the supply shelf and lined a shallow wooden crate with it. He worked quietly, movements deliberate, respectful, as if the shelter itself might wake up startled if he made too much noise. When the crate was ready, He placed the puppy inside, cupping his hands around him for a long moment before letting go. The pup curled instinctively into the blanket, barely moving but no longer completely still. A whisper of relief slipped from Noah's throat. He sat back on his heels, watching the small chest rise in uneven patterns. "You are holding on," he said softly. The fire popped once, scattering a few sparks inside the stove. Noah leaned against the wall, letting the heat soak through his jacket. His breath eased, but a familiar weight settled on him, the kind he had carried ever since returning from deployment. It was strange how memories surfaced when the world grew quiet. He remembered nights overseas when he had crouched beside teammates in the cold, willing them to breathe just a little longer, to stay until dawn. Tonight felt too close to that. Too familiar. Yet different in a way he could not name. He stood and poured a small amount of water into a tin cup, warming it slightly near the stove before dipping his fingers into it. He let a few drops fall near the puppy's mouth, careful not to startle him. The pup stirred, not fully waking but responding, his nose twitching faintly at the warmth. Noah smiled, a tired but sincere curve of his lips. "There you go," he murmured. "One step at a time." The puppy's breaths came steadier now, still fragile but no longer fading. Noah sat close, letting his presence be a quiet reassurance. The shelter hummed with calm, a rare stillness after the storm's chaos. Snow slid softly from the roof, tapping the ground in slow, muffled thuds. For the first time since he had spotted that small rise in the snow, Noah felt something shift inside him. A kind of quiet purpose, not loud or heroic, but gentle and grounding. As the firelight flickered across the tiny crate, he knew the night was not simply about rescue. It was about staying. About giving warmth where the world had offered none. And Noah Whitaker had always known how to stay. The fire settled into a low, steady glow, casting soft amber across the small shelter as night deepened around it. Noah stayed close to the crate, listening to the quiet breaths coming from the bundle of blanket and fur. Each inhale felt a little less fragile than the last, as though the warmth was stitching something back together inside the tiny body. The storm outside had moved farther down the ridge, leaving only the distant sigh of wind brushing through the pines. The stillness made the room feel sacred, like a place where time hesitated out of respect for the struggle happening in a space no larger than a shoebox. Noah reached out and rested two fingers lightly against the puppy's side. The warmth had grown, faint but steady. The rise and fall of the small chest was uneven, but no longer fading. The little pup let out a sound, the gentlest whimper, almost like a question. Noah leaned closer and spoke softly. "You are doing good. Just keep trying." The pup shifted weakly, a small twitch of his paw, not quite purposeful but alive. Noah sat back, feeling something inside him, something long quiet, start to move. He was used to reading signs in silence, used to hoping for one more breath when everything around him said it would not come. But tonight the hope felt different. It felt small, warm, and personal. He removed his gloves and held his hands just above the crate to let the heat of his skin soften the air around the puppy. The fire popped gently in the stove, sending a faint wave of warmth across the room. The shadows danced along the wooden walls, slow and soft, like memories settling after being shaken loose. Noah took a small canteen from his pack and warmed it near the stove, letting the metal absorb just enough heat to keep the water comfortable. He dipped the corner of a clean cloth into it, squeezed the excess moisture away, and touched it carefully to the puppy's lips. The pup reacted with a subtle tremble, his tongue making the smallest motion toward the damp cloth. Noah waited, offering patience instead of urgency. The pup managed another faint lick, then another, each movement tiny but determined. Noah felt his chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with a quiet, unexpected gratitude. "There you go," he whispered. "That is it. You are not done yet." The flames flickered again, lighting the puppy's features in soft strokes. Noah noticed the lighter patch of fur above the pup's nose, a tiny marking shaped almost like a teardrop. He traced the air above it with a finger, careful not to touch. The pup let out a breath, a small warm puff that drifted into the space between them. Outside the window, the sky began to shift. The storm clouds thinned, revealing faint hints of starlight slipping through the ragged edges. Noah watched the sky for a moment, then looked back at the crate, at the fragile body curled inside it. The world had tried to bury him in silence and snow, but here he was, breathing into the amber glow of a fire built by a stranger who refused to walk past. Noah leaned closer, letting the warmth of the moment settle over him. Tonight, the little pup was not alone. And neither was he. The night deepened into a quiet that felt almost fragile, as if one loud breath could cause the whole ridge to shatter back into storm. Inside the shelter, Noah kept his focus on the tiny form curled in the crate, watching for any sign that the warmth was reaching deep enough to matter. The puppy's breaths had grown steadier, but there was a subtle hitch now, a faint struggle under each inhale that made Noah's chest tighten. He leaned closer, placing a gentle hand above the blanket without touching the pup directly, letting his warmth drift down like a quiet reassurance. The puppy let out a soft sound, not a whimper exactly, more like a sigh caught halfway between effort and exhaustion. Noah recognized it immediately. He had heard it from people who were fighting their way back from cold, hunger, and long nights that pushed the limits of the human spirit. Sometimes the body fought hardest right before it began to fail. He lifted the crate slightly and moved it closer to the stove, careful to keep it at a safe distance from the heat. The firelight painted the puppy's fur in strokes of gold and shadow, revealing how small he truly was. His paws, no bigger than the width of Noah's thumb, twitched softly as if he were running in some dream that had not quite let him go. Noah reached into his pack for a small emergency thermal cloth that he had learned to depend on during winter exercises. He unfolded it and draped it around the inside edges of the crate, creating a deeper pocket of warmth without overwhelming the pup. The puppy's breathing stuttered once, then steadied. Noah held still, letting the moment pass like a fragile thread stretching across a cold night. "Stay with me," he murmured, the words soft enough that only the flicker of flames heard them. Snow shifted outside, sliding from the roof with a muted thump. The wind pressed faintly against the walls again, cautious now, as if testing the shelter before moving on. Noah added a small handful of kindling to the fire, watching the flames catch and brighten. The warmth reached the crate, curling around the puppy in gentle waves. Another faint movement traveled through the blanket. The pup's nose twitched, his whiskers fluttering at the change in temperature. Noah felt a small swell of hope. He placed his hand near the edge of the crate again, letting the pup feel the presence of something steady, something living. Slowly, the tiny body shifted, not much, but enough to show there was still fight left in him. The breaths came more evenly, each one a small step back into the world. Noah exhaled, his shoulders lowering as the tension eased. He leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closing for a moment, listening to the quiet. Not the storm. Not the past. Just the sound of a tiny heartbeat somewhere inside that crate, choosing life over silence. In the glow of the fire, Noah Whitaker understood that this night was not just a rescue. It was a test of faith, the kind measured not in words, but in the soft persistence of breath against all odds. The hours slipped by in a slow, fragile rhythm, measured only by the soft crackle of the fire and the tiny breaths coming from the crate. Noah stayed awake, fighting the weight in his eyelids, unwilling to let even a minute pass without watching the small life he had pulled from the snow. The storm had faded to nothing more than a distant murmur along the ridge, and now the night settled into a stillness so complete that even the wind seemed to pause outside the shelter. Noah leaned closer, checking the puppy again. The breathing had steadied, but every inhale still carried a faint tremor, the kind that came from a body trying to warm itself from the inside out. Noah reached in and gently touched the edge of the blanket, careful not to disturb the little creature nestled in its folds. The pup responded with the smallest shift. A tiny stretch of one paw before settling again. It was enough to make Noah exhale slowly, a breath that felt like a quiet prayer leaving his chest. He glanced toward the small window carved into the wall. A strip of sky was beginning to lighten, not with sunrise, but with the soft glow that comes before dawn, a promise that the longest part of night was nearly over. The fire cast warm waves across the room, illuminating the puppy's features in a soft amber hue. His tiny nose twitched, whiskers fluttering slightly as the air warmed around him. Noah felt something in his chest loosen, a something he had not felt since long before he left the service. Hope was a strange companion, showing up in the smallest, quietest moments. He reached for his canteen again, warmed it slightly near the stove, and dabbed a few drops of water onto his fingertip. He brought it gently to the pup's lips. This time, the reaction was clearer. The puppy's mouth opened just a little, his tongue brushing lightly across Noah's finger. It was a weak motion, but deliberate, the first sign of intention Noah had seen. "There you go," Noah whispered. "You are still with me." The pup let out a faint sound, almost like a sigh, and shifted closer to the heat radiating from Noah's hand. The crate felt warmer now, the air inside no longer chilled but softly heated from the fire and the thermal cloth. Noah adjusted the blanket slightly, tucking it around the tiny body to hold the warmth in place. The pup settled again, breathing more evenly now, each inhale stronger than it had been an hour before. Noah sat back, letting his shoulders rest against the wooden wall. He finally allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, letting the tension lift from his frame. The shelter felt different now. Not just a refuge from the cold, but a place where something fragile had been given a chance to fight. Outside, the first hint of early morning traced the ridge, a pale blue line that cut through the darkness. Noah watched it slowly expand, softening the edges of the world. He looked back at the tiny creature whose life had nearly been taken by the storm. The firelight flickered across the puppy's fur, and Noah whispered into the quiet, "You are not done. Not tonight." And in the stillness, it almost felt like the little pup heard him. The early light reached the shelter in a faint, delicate glow, brushing the wooden walls with the softest gray. Morning had come, but the warmth of day had not yet followed. The world outside remained cold, quiet, and untouched, as if the ridge were still holding its breath. Inside, Noah leaned over the crate again, watching for the subtle rise and fall that had carried him through the night. For a long moment, he saw nothing. The blanket lay still, the tiny shape beneath it unmoving. A thin silence settled over the room, a silence heavy enough to stir memories he had spent years learning how to live with. Noah lowered his hand, hovering it just above the puppy's chest. No warmth met his palm at first. No shift. No tremble. The fire crackled, the only sound in the room, and even that seemed unsure. Noah leaned closer, breath held in his throat. "Come on," he whispered, the words a thread pulled straight from the part of him that still believed in second chances. He waited. The seconds stretched, long and quiet. Then, just as a thin ache pressed into Noah's ribs, there came the smallest movement. A faint, uneven inhale. A slow exhale. So soft it barely disturbed the blanket. Noah let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The little pup was still fighting, still choosing the world one breath at a time. But the weakness in that movement told him the night had taken more from the puppy than he feared. The warmth had helped, but the tiny body was far from safe. Noah checked the temperature inside the crate, adjusting the blanket and shifting the thermal cloth to hold the heat more evenly. He warmed another small cloth with clean water and touched it gently to the puppy's lips. This time the response was slower, not the deliberate motion he had seen earlier, but a faint quiver, like the effort alone cost more energy than the body could spare. Noah's jaw tightened. He sat back for a moment, feeling the edges of worry creep in. Yet even in that worry, he sensed something else, a persistence, small and fragile, but real. The puppy was not giving up. Not yet. Outside, the dawn brightened, washing the snow in pale silver. Light slipped through the window and fell across the crate, touching the little body as if the morning itself were offering something gentle. Noah moved the crate into that soft beam, knowing every bit of warmth mattered. The pup stirred again. A slight stretch of a paw. A flicker beneath the eyelid. A breath that held just a little more strength than the one before. Noah reached down, placing a hand near the puppy without touching. "I am right here," he said softly. "You are not alone in this." The fire continued its slow, steady burn, filling the shelter with warmth. Between flame and sunlight, the cold began to retreat. And in the center of that fragile glow, a tiny heartbeat pressed forward again, quiet but unwavering, refusing to fade into the silence of the ridge. Morning settled fully over the ridge, stretching soft light across the snow and slipping through the shelter's small window in a muted silver beam. The fire had burned low but steady, offering a warmth that mixed gently with the chill still clinging to the air. Noah moved closer to the crate, careful not to cast a shadow over the fragile glow resting on the tiny puppy's form. For a moment, the pup lay still, the blanket rising only slightly with each delicate breath. Noah let his hand hover above him again, feeling the faint heat the little body was beginning to hold. The frailty of it struck him, a reminder of how close the night had come to swallowing this small life. He whispered, "Just a little more, buddy. Keep going." The puppy stirred, a subtle tremble rolling through his limbs as if his body were remembering how to move. His eyelids fluttered, not fully opening, but shifting enough to send a tiny flicker beneath the lashes. Noah leaned in, barely breathing, watching for any sign that the pup was strong enough to take the next step. The minutes passed slowly, filled with the soft hiss of embers settling in the stove. Then it happened, a small, fragile movement. The puppy's head lifted no more than an inch, wobbling under its own weight before sinking gently back into the blanket. It was brief, unsteady, barely there. But to Noah, it felt like the sun had reached straight into the crate. "That is it," he murmured, voice cracking just slightly. "You are still fighting." He warmed another cloth, squeezing a few drops of water along his fingertip, and brought it near the tiny muzzle. This time the response was clearer. The pup turned slightly toward the moisture, tongue flicking out in a slow, effortful motion. It was not strength, but it was intent, and intent meant the world. Noah offered another drop, then another, careful not to overwhelm the tiny creature. Each faint lick was a small victory. Outside the window, sunlight grew stronger, brushing the tops of the pines in a warm gold that signaled the storm had passed for good. The brightness spilled through the windowpane, landing across the crate in a soft band of light. Noah gently shifted the crate so the puppy could feel the added warmth. The pup responded with another movement, small, shaky, but real. A paw stretched outward, the tiniest attempt at reaching, followed by a breath that steadied instead of slipping. Noah felt something deep inside him release, a quiet unraveling of the fear that had held him tense through the long night. The puppy's chest rose again, more confidently this time, then fell in a slow, even rhythm that filled the shelter with a fragile peace. Noah placed his hand near the crate, letting the puppy sense his presence without pressure. "You made it through the night," he said softly. "And now the morning is yours." In the pale gold of that early hour, with sunlight warming the floorboards and the embers offering their last gentle sighs, the little heartbeat inside the crate answered with one steady, determined breath after another. The sunlight strengthened as the morning unfolded, pouring across the snow in soft golden layers that pushed the last traces of night toward the tree-line. Inside the shelter, the warmth gathered slowly, filling the space with a gentle calm. Noah knelt beside the crate again, watching the tiny puppy with the quiet focus of someone who understood how fragile a returning life could be. The pup's breathing had grown steadier, each inhale carrying a little more strength, each exhale releasing a little more of the cold that had once claimed him. Noah lifted the blanket slightly, letting the warm air drift around the small body. The puppy's eyes fluttered, opening just enough for a thin glimmer of brown to appear beneath heavy lids. It was not a full look, not a clear recognition, but it was the first time. Those eyes had found the light since being buried under the snow. Noah felt his chest tighten with something warm, quiet, and unexpected. "Hey there," he whispered. "Welcome back." The puppy blinked slowly, unfocused but trying. His tiny nose twitched, catching the scent of the warm air and the faint smell of wool from the blanket. Another breath rose in his chest, stronger this time, and the small body shifted just slightly as if responding to the sound of Noah's voice. Noah warmed a small amount of water again and brought it gently to the puppy's mouth. The pup's tongue met the moisture with a little more intention now, taking in a few drops before resting again. It was slow progress, but progress all the same. Outside, a bird called from somewhere high on the ridge, its song soft and tentative, the kind that only appears after a long storm. The sound drifted into the shelter, mingling with the crackle of the fire. Noah looked toward the window, watching the sky brighten. The storm had taken its toll, but it had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean by snow and morning light. When he turned back to the crate, he noticed something new. One tiny paw had reached out from beneath the blanket, stretching toward the edge of the crate as if trying to understand this warmer world. The movement was shaky, but it carried determination. Noah offered his hand nearby, not touching, just letting the pup sense the presence. The tiny paw twitched again, a faint effort to draw closer. Noah smiled, the kind of smile that softened his features, warming them the same way the fire warmed the shelter. "You are a fighter," he said softly. "You made it farther than anyone expected." The puppy let out a quiet sound, almost like a soft hum, and nestled deeper into the blanket. His breathing settled into a slow, steady rhythm that filled the room with a gentle peace. Noah sat back, letting himself breathe with the rhythm, letting the relief sink in. The long night was behind them now. A small life had broken through the edge of silence and found a way to return. In the golden light of morning, Noah watched the tiny heartbeat that had once flickered in the snow grow stronger, steadier, and full of promise. The ridge outside was waking up, but inside the shelter, a quieter miracle unfolded, one breath at a time. The morning continued to warm the small shelter, gently nudging the last traces of night from its corners. Noah remained close to the crate, watching the little pup with a steady patience that came from somewhere deeper than duty. The puppy's eyes were open now, not wide, not fully aware, but open enough to reflect the soft glow of the fire. They held a faint shine, fragile but true, like a light trying to find its way back into the world. The tiny body shifted again, this time with more intention. One paw pressed weakly against the blanket, followed by the smallest attempt to lift his head. The movement was unsteady, trembling under its own weight, but it was a step forward, the kind that carried meaning far beyond its size. Noah moved his hand closer, palm turned upward. "Take your time," he whispered. The puppy's nose twitched, picking up the warmth of Noah's skin. After a moment of hesitation, the pup leaned his head toward that warmth and let it rest there, featherlight, trusting without knowing why. Noah froze, letting the moment hold. The tiny heartbeat against his palm was soft but sure, each pulse matching the slow rhythm of a life returning. Outside the window, sunlight stretched farther across the ridge, melting thin patches of frost along the shelter's roof. The snow glimmered in soft gold, the calm after the storm settling into the mountains like a quiet blessing. Inside, the air had grown warm enough that Noah loosened his jacket. He kept one hand near the puppy, offering steady reassurance, while the other gently smoothed the blanket around the small form. The pup let out a tiny sound, high and thin, almost like the beginning of a whine. But there was no fear in it, only effort. He shifted again, nudging closer to Noah's hand, his breaths no longer shallow but slow and intentional. Noah's voice softened. "You are safe now. I have got you." The puppy blinked lazily, eyelids heavy, then nudged Noah's palm again with a faint push of his nose. It was a tiny gesture, but it carried something unmistakable, a recognition, fragile and unspoken, but real. Noah felt that recognition settle deep inside him. For the first time since he had found the pup beneath the snow, the little creature was choosing to stay. Awake, choosing to lean into the world rather than away from it. He lifted the puppy carefully, creating a warm cradle between his hands. The pup curled instinctively, his body fitting perfectly into the space created for him. Noah could feel the warmth building now, gentle but present. A sign that the storm's grip had loosened enough for healing to begin. Frost, Noah murmured, testing the name softly, letting it drift through the quiet shelter. The puppy's ears twitched faintly at the sound, as if acknowledging it in his own sleepy way. Noah smiled at the small reaction. "Yeah," he whispered. "Frost suits you." The fire crackled softly behind them, casting warm light over both man and pup. In that glow, the ridge outside seemed distant, softened by morning. And inside the shelter, a different kind of warmth settled, one born not from flame, but from two lives finding each other in the quiet after the storm. The light in the shelter softened into a warm, steady glow, the kind that settles only after the longest parts of morning have unfolded. Frost slept in the cradle of Noah's hands, his tiny breaths brushing gently against the marine's palm. Each rise and fall carried more strength now, more certainty, as if the pup's fragile body had finally remembered how to trust the warmth surrounding him. Noah held him close, letting the pup rest against the steady beat of his heartbeat. Frost's small ears twitched, reacting to the deep, calm rhythm. The movement was faint, but it told Noah that the little one was listening, sensing, learning the sound of safety. Outside the window, the snow reflected the growing daylight, shimmering like a field of glass as the sun climbed higher. The harsh edges of the night had softened into a quiet peace, untouched by wind. Inside, the heat from the stove spread across the room, wrapping both man and pup in a cocoon of calm. Noah gently brushed a thumb along Frost's back, feeling the warmth that had taken hours to build. The tiny spine no longer felt brittle with cold. Instead, it held a faint but promising steadiness, a quiet declaration of life. Frost shifted, lifting his head just enough to press it weakly against Noah's thumb. It was a gesture Noah recognized instantly, the silent way a creature says, "I am here," before it has the strength to speak in any other language. "You are doing great," Noah whispered. "You came a long way." Frost's eyes opened once more, this time holding a soft clarity. They were not fully focused, but they found Noah's face through the blur, pausing on him with a trust so pure it made Noah's chest tighten. The little puppy's gaze lingered for a moment, then softened as he nestled closer into Noah's hands, choosing that warmth over the blanket. Noah exhaled slowly, the breath easing from him like a quiet release. He could feel something inside him settling, not just relief, but a sense of connection forming in the quiet space where fear had once lived. Frost let out a tiny hum, almost melodic, a sound that seemed too tender for a creature so small. It drifted through the shelter like a soft note carried on warm air. Noah smiled, leaning his forehead gently toward the pup without touching. "You fought through the hardest part," he murmured. "Now you rest. I will carry the rest of the way." The fire behind them cracked softly as another ember gave way. Sunlight slipped farther into the room, reaching Frost's fur and turning it golden at the edges. Noah remained still, letting the warmth of the moment wash through him. Frost's breathing had become a calm rhythm, perfectly in sync with the quiet around them. The storm had taken much, but it had left this, a heartbeat, a fragile life, and a bond forming in the stillness. And in the gentle hush of the shelter, Noah sensed a truth settling deeper than words: faith does not always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it comes in the smallest breath, the faintest sound, or the weight of a tiny pup trusting your hands to hold his world steady. The sun climbed higher over the ridge, stretching its warmth across the snow until the world outside the shelter shimmered with a quiet promise. Inside, the fire had settled into a soft glow, casting gentle waves of amber across the wooden walls. Frost slept in the cradle of Noah's palms, his tiny breath steady now, no longer fragile notes drifting on the edge of silence. Each inhale was a quiet declaration that the cold had lost its claim on him. Noah watched him with a stillness shaped by gratitude. The pup's fur had warmed enough that the earlier chill no longer lingered beneath Noah's fingertips. Frost shifted slightly, nestling deeper into the space between Noah's hands, as if the steady pulse beneath them had become his anchor. The small movement drew a soft smile from Noah, the kind that rose slowly, as if built from pieces of the long night finally settling into peace. Outside, a breeze whispered against the shelter, gentle and unhurried, carrying the clean scent of fresh snow and pine. The storm was gone, leaving the ridge washed in gold. Inside, Frost stirred again, lifting his head in a slow, wobbly motion. His eyes opened wider this time, clearer than before, reflecting the firelight like tiny pools of warm brown. He blinked up at Noah, studying the face above him with a new awareness, as if recognizing the voice that had carried him through the dark. Noah lowered his hand slightly, allowing Frost to lean into it. The pup pressed his nose gently against Noah's thumb, a small gesture, but full of quiet trust. Noah exhaled, the breath deep and steady. "You made it," he murmured. Frost let out a tiny sound, almost like a soft chirp, and nudged closer. Noah lifted him carefully, settling the pup against his chest. The little heartbeat rested over his own, two rhythms aligning in a way that felt more like grace than coincidence. The warmth between them grew, subtle but undeniable. The morning light slipped farther into the shelter, finding them both, illuminating Frost's fur in soft gold and brushing across Noah's tired but peaceful expression. For a long moment, neither moved. The world outside continued its quiet awakening, but in the small shelter on the ridge, time seemed to hold still just long enough to honor the fragile miracle that had unfolded through the night. Frost shifted once more, releasing a tiny sigh as he relaxed fully into Noah's arms. It was the sound of a life choosing to stay, choosing the warmth that had saved him. Noah looked down at the pup and felt a gentle truth settle in his chest, calm and certain. Sometimes faith did not arrive loud or triumphant. Sometimes it came in a faint breath beneath the snow, a heartbeat stirring in the quiet, or the weight of a tiny German shepherd finding safety in a marine's hands. And in that tender silence, Noah knew that neither of them would walk away from this ridge the same as they had arrived.